Hatti-humayun, also known as hatti-sharif, is the diplomatic's term for a document or handwritten note of an official nature composed by an Ottoman sultan. The terms come from Hatt, Humayun and Serif. These notes were commonly written by the sultan personally, although they could also be transcribed by a palace scribe. They were written usually in response to, and directly on, a document submitted to the sultan by the Grand Vizier or another officer of the Ottoman government. Thus, they could be approvals or denials of a letter of petition, acknowledgements of a report, grants of permission for a request, an annotation to a decree, or other government documents. Hatti-humayuns could be composed from scratch, rather than as a response to an existing document. After the Tanzimat reform, aimed to modernize the Ottoman Empire, Hatti-humayuns of the routine kind were supplanted by the practice of irade-i-seni, in which the sultan's spoken response was recorded on the document by his scribe. There are nearly 100,000 Hatti-humayuns in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. Among the more famous are the Edict of Gülhane of 1839 and the Imperial Reform Edict of 1856. For this last one, the Turkish term Tanzimat Fermanı is more accurate. This decree, which started the so-called Tanzimat reforms, is so called because it carries a handwritten order by the Sultan to the Grand Vizier to execute his command. The term, Hatti-humayun, can sometimes also be used in a literal sense, meaning a document handwritten by an Ottoman Sultan. Types of Hatti-humayun. The Hatti-humayun would usually be written to the Grand Vizier, or in his absence, to his replacement, or to another senior official such as the Grand Admiral or the Governor-General of Rumeli. There were three types of Hatti-humayuns: those addressed to a government post, those on the white, those on a document. Hatti-humayun to a government post routine decrees or titles of privilege were written by a scribe, but those written to certain officials and those that were particularly important were preceded by the Sultan's handwritten note beside his seal. The tufa and the notation might be surrounded by a decorated frame. The note would emphasize a particular part of his edict, urging or ordering it to be followed without fault. These were called Hatti-humayun lamove fermain or unvanina Hatti-humayun. The note might use a cliched phrase like, to be done as required, or, my command is to carried out as required and no one is to interfere with its execution. Some edicts to the title would start with a note from the Sultan praising the person to whom the edict was addressed, in order to encourage or honor him. Rarely, there might be a threat such as, if you want to keep your head, carry out this order as required. Hatti-humayun on the white. Hatti-humayun on the white were documents originating with the Sultan rather than a notation on an existing document. They were so called because the edict was written on a blank page. They could be documents such as a command, an edict, an appointment letter or a letter to a foreign ruler. There also exist Hatti-humayuns expressing the Sultan's opinions or even his feelings on certain matters. For example, after the successful defense of Mosul against the forces of Nadir Shah in 1743, Sultan Mahmud I sent a Hatti-humayun to the governor Hüseyin Pasha, which praised in verse the heroic exploits of the governor and the warriors of Mosul. Hatti-humayun on a document. In normal bureaucratic procedure, a document would be submitted by the Grand Vizier, or his deputy the Kaymakam, who would summarize a situation for the Sultan, and request the Sultan's will on the matter. Such documents were called telis until the 19th century and takrir later on. The Sultan's handwritten response were called Hatti-humayun on telis or Hatti-humayun on takrir. Other types of documents submitted to the Sultan were petitions, sworn transcriptions of oral petitions, reports from a higher to a lower office, religious reports by Qadis to higher officers and record books. These would be called Hatti-humayun on Arz, Hatti-humayun on Mars, etc., depending on the type of the document. The Sultan responded not only to documents submitted to him by his viziers but also to petitions submitted to him by his subjects following their Friday prayer. Thus, hatti-humayuns on documents were analogous to papal rescripts and rescripts used in other imperial regimes. When the Sultan contacted the public for Friday prayer or other occasions, people would hand in petitions addressed to him. These were later discussed and decided upon by the Council of Viziers. They would prepare a summary of all petitions and the action decided upon for each one. The Sultan would write on the same sheet, "I have been informed," multiple times, followed by the item number to which he is referring. When palace bureaucracy was reorganized after the Tanzimat reforms, the Sultan's decision came to be written directly by the chief scribe at the bottom of the summary document, and this one writing applied to all decisions. Practices. When a petition or memo requiring the Sultan's decision was to be submitted to him, the Grand Vizier usually prepared an executive summary as an attachment. In some cases, rather than prepare a separate summary document, the Grand Vizier or his deputy would write his summary and views diagonally on the top or bottom margins of documents coming from lower functionaries. Such annotations on a written document were called dirkanar. Sometimes the Grand Vizier would append a separate cover page on top of a proposal coming from a lower-level functionary like the Treasurer or the Minister of Defense, introducing it as, for example, "This is the proposal of the Defterdar." In such cases, the Sultan would write his hatti-humayun on the cover page. In other cases, the Grand Vizier would summarize the matter directly in the margin of the document submitted by the lower functionary, and the Sultan would write on the same page as well. Sometimes the Sultan would write his decision on a fresh piece of paper attached to the submitted document. In most cases, hatti-humayuns were written by the Sultan himself, although there exists some that were penned by the chief scribe or another functionary. Important hatti-humayuns on the white were sometimes drafted by the head of diplomatic correspondence or the Secretary of Navy. In some cases, there were notations as to who prepared the draft of the document that was then rewritten by the Sultan. Hatti-humayuns usually were not dated, although some, concerning withdrawal of money from the treasury, did carry dates. Most late-period hatti-humayuns and irage had dates. Abdul-Hamid I was especially inclined to date his hatti-humayuns. His Grand Vizier Koka Yusuf Pasha later suggested this practice of dating hatti-humayuns to Abdul-Hamid's successor Selim III so that he could follow up whether his orders were carried out. However, this suggestion was not adopted. Abdul-Hamid II used signatures toward the latter parts of his reign. Language. The language of hatti-humayuns on documents generally was a form of Turkish understandable even today and has changed little over the centuries. Many documents or annotations were short comments such as, "I gave," "be it given," "will not happen," "be it written," is clear to me," "provide it," "it has come to my sight," "be it answered," "record it," "be it supplied," "be they without need." Some sultans would write longer comments, starting with, "It has become my knowledge," and continue with an introduction on the topic. Then give their opinions such as, "This reports, petitions, records, etc. appearance and meaning has become my imperial knowledge." Some common phrases in hatti-humayuns are, "According to this report, the matter is clear," "I permit," "I give," "according to the provided facts." Hatti-humayuns to the position often had cliched expressions such as, "to be done as required," or "to be done as required, not to be contravened." Hatti-humayuns on the white were more elaborate and some may have been drafted by a scribe before being penned by the Sultan. They often started by addressing the recipient. The Sultan would refer to his Grand Vizier as "my Vizier," or if his Grand Vizier was away at war, would refer to his deputy as "Karimakam Pasa." Those written to other officials would often start with an expression like, "You who are my vizier of Rumeli, Mehmed Pasha." The head of religious affairs or the Sultan's personal tutor would be addressed simply and respectfully. In cases where the hatti-humayun was to be delivered ceremoniously, with an imperial sword and a cloak, as in an appointment to a high rank, there would be a flowery salutation such as, "After I have honored you with my glorious greeting, you should know that." Correspondence to a military commander could have a lengthy and ornate salutation or just address him by his title. A note without an address was meant for the Grand Vizier or his deputy. History. The earliest known hatti-humayun is the one sent by Sultan Murad I to Evrenes Bey in 1386, commending the commander for his conquest and giving him advice on how to administer people. Until the reign of Murad III, viziers used to present matters orally to the sultans, who would then give their consent or denial, also orally. While hatti-humayuns were very rare prior to this, they proliferated afterward, especially during the reigns of sultans such as Abdul-Hamid I, Selim III and Mahmud II, who wanted to increase their control and be informed of everything. The content of hatti-humayuns tends to reflect the power struggle that existed between the sultan and his council of viziers. The process of using the hatti-humayun to authorize the actions of the Grand Vizier came into existence in the reign of Murad III. This led to a loss of authority and independence in the Grand Vizier, while other palace people such as the master of the harem or concubines who had greater access to the sultan gained in influence. By giving detailed instructions or advice, the sultans reduced the role of the Grand Viziers to be just a supervisor to the execution of his commands. This situation appears to have created some backlash, as during most of the 17th century there were attempts to return to Grand Vizier's prestige and the power of supreme proxy, and over time hatti-humayuns returned to their former simplicity. However, in the 18th century, Selim III became concerned by the over-centralization of the bureaucracy and its general inefficacy. He created consulting bodies to share some of the authority with him and the Grand Vizier. He would give detailed answers on hatti-humayuns to questions asked of him and would make inquiries as to whether his decisions were followed. The hatti-humayun became Selim II's tool to ensure rapid and precise execution of his decisions. During the reign of Mahmud II, in the early 1830s, the practice of writing on the memoranda of the Grand Vizier was replaced by the chief scribe of the imperial office recording the sultan's decision. After the Tanzimat, the government bureaucracy was streamlined. The use of hatti-humayuns on the white between the Sultan and the Grand Vizier continued on for matters of great importance such as high-level appointments or promotions. Infrequently, the Grand Vizier and the Sultan wrote to each other directly as well. The large number of documents that required the Sultan's decision through either a hatti-humayun or an irad-i-seniya is considered to be an indication of how centralized the Ottoman government was. Abdul-Hamid I has written himself in one of his hatti-humayuns, "I have no time that my pen leaves my hand. With God's resolve it does not." The early hatti-humayuns were written in the calligraphic styles of Talik, Hirmasi, Nesih and Rikar. After Mahmud II, they were only written in Rikar. Ahmed III and Mahmud II were skilled penmen and their hatti-humayuns are notable for their long and elaborate annotations on official documents. In contrast, sultans who accessed the throne at an early age, such as Murad V and Mehmed IV, display poor spelling and calligraphy. Archival. Hatti-humayuns sent to the Grand Vizier were handled and recorded at the Amadi Kalimi, the Secretariat of the Grand Vizier. The Amadi Kalimi organized and recorded all correspondence between the Grand Vizier and the Sultan, as well as any correspondence with foreign rulers and with Ottoman ambassadors. Other hatti-humayuns, not addressed to the Grand Vizier, were stored in other document stores. cut out hatti-humayuns during the creation of the state archives in the 19th century. Documents were organized according to their importance. Hatti-humayuns on the white were considered the most important, along with those on international relations, border transactions and internal regulations. Documents of secondary importance were routinely placed in trunks and stored in cellars in need of repair, presumably as a sign of respect toward the Sultan. Hatti-humayuns on documents were cut out and stored together with the hatti-humayuns on the white, while the rest of the documents were stored elsewhere. These cut-out hatti-humayuns were not cross-referenced with the documents to which they referred and were only annotated by the palace office using general terms and an approximate date, because sultans were not in the habit of dating their hatti-humayuns until the late period of the empire. In most cases, the documents associated with them are not known. Conversely, the decisions on many a memorandum, petition, or request submitted to the Sultan are unknown. The separation of hatti-humayuns from their documents is considered a great loss of information for researchers. The Ottoman Archives in Istanbul has a special section of cut-out hatti-humayuns. Catalogues. Today all known hatti-humayuns have been recorded in a computerized database in the Ottoman archives of the Turkish Prime Minister in Istanbul, and they number 95,134. Most hatti-humayuns are stored at the Boa and in the Topkapi Museum archive. The Boa contains 58,000 hatti-humayuns. Because the hatti-humayuns were originally not organized systematically, historians in the 19th and early 20th century created several catalogues of hatti-humayuns based on different organizing principles. These historic catalogues are still in use by historians at the Boa. Hatti-humayun Tasnifa is the catalogue of the hatti-humayuns belonging to the Ahmadi Khalimi. It consists of 31 volumes listing 62,312 documents, with their short summaries. This catalogue lists documents from 1730 to 1839 but covers primarily those from the reigns of Selim III and Mahmud II within this period. Ali Emiri Tasnifa is a chronological catalogue of 181,239 documents organized according to the periods of sovereignty of sultans, from the foundation of the Ottoman state to the Abdumside period. Along with hatti-humayuns, this catalogue includes documents on foreign relations. Ibn Yemen Tasnifa is a catalogue created by a committee led by historian Ibn Yemen Mahmud Kamal. It covers the period of 1290 to 1873. Along with 329 hatti-humayuns, it lists documents of various other types relating to palace correspondence, private correspondence, appointments, land grants, and charitable endowments. Muallim Sevdet Tasnifa catalogues 216,572 documents in 34 volumes, organized by topics that include local governments, provincial administration, vakif and internal security. The Hatti-Humayun of 1856. Although there exist thousands of hatti-humayuns, the Imperial Reform Edict of 1856 is well enough known that most history texts refer to it simply as Hatti-Humayun. This decree from Sultan Abdumside I promised equality in education, government appointments, and administration of justice to all, regardless of creed. In Duster, the Ottoman Code of Laws, the text of this firman is introduced as a copy of the Supreme Firman written to the Grand Vizier, perfected by decoration above with a Hatti-Humayun, so, technically this edict was a Hatti-Humayun to the rank. The Reform Decree of 1856 is sometimes referred to by another name, the Rescript of Reform. Here, the word rescript is used to sense of edict, decree, not reply to a query or other document. The Hatti-Humayun of 1856 was an extension of another important edict of reform, the Hatti Sharif of Gulnar of 1839, and part of the Tanzimat reforms. That document is also generally referred to as the Hatt-i Sharif, although there are many other Hatt-i Sharifs, a term that is synonymous with hatti-humayun, the Sultan's script. The term hatti-humayun is occasionally used in the literal sense of the handwriting of the Sultan. For example, the imperial poet Nefi has written a masnavi of 22 couplets describing the calligraphy of Sultan Murad IV, called Vasfi Hatti-Humayun I Sultan Murad Han. The whole poem is a compliment to the writings of the Sultan.